Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Frederick Murphy, and welcome back to another episode of History Before Us. And I am in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, at a very, very special location. It's a railroad museum. I will have to say this is my second railroad museum. The very first one was in Dickson County, Tennessee, where my ancestors are from. And now I am in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and I have some very special people that are here with me right now that's going to give us a tour of this original building here in Edgecombe County. We are in Edgecombe County, right?
Yes.
Edgecombe County. Appreciate it.
Well,
No, we're not in Edgecombe.
Where you cross the tracks, you're
we're
in
300 feet from Edgecombe County.
We're 300 feet from Edgecombe County. So I was somewhat close, but not close enough. So I'll let everyone here introduce themselves, if they don't mind.
Okay. I'm Joyce Edwards Dantzler, president of the Rocky Mount Railroad Museum.
All right.
Hello, I'm Tom Stallings, member of the museum.
All right.
Hi, I'm Sam Scott, member of the board of the Rocky Mount Railroad Museum.
All right. Nice. So one of the questions that I have is, as it relates to preservation, did this museum or did this building ever come to a halt as it relates to the stopping of operations, or has it always been up and running?
It's always been up and running, but it has modified uses.
Okay.
This used to be the administrative building for the Atlantic Coastline Railroad.
Okay.
And the train station was here as well. So you'd also have the Railroad Express Agency, which was the predecessor to UPS and FedEx.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also hiring and training that was conducted here. The superintendent's office was here, but the train station has always been here.
Always been here. All right. Good stuff. And so I'm always seeing people coming in and out, and over there was a wedding party that was over there. So it's a very beautiful historic building that I'm sure is a staple here in the town that everyone does know. So can we take a look on the inside and give us some details on how it may have operated historically versus what it looks like now? I mean, obviously we know we have modern technology, so people are swiping their cards for payment or already walking up with the prepaid ticket, but historically, what would have it looked like for individuals who were coming into this location? And anyone can provide that information if you don't mind.
Back in the day, you used to have probably about twice as much passenger activity
Okay.
as there is today. But this building has been remodeled, I think, back in the mid 2000s to
Right.
what it is today. But there weren't any other businesses located here besides CSX Railroad and the Amtrak station.
Okay.
So the railroads got out of the passenger business back in the early 70s.
Okay.
It just wasn't profitable. And Amtrak was started as a result of that. But all of the freight activity is conducted in a terminal further south from here. So this was all Amtrak, passenger service, freight service for the Railroad Express Agency, and they had training and business offices related to the railroad.
Okay. And it's still beautiful. As it relates to the modifications, do you all know about what may still be original and what may have been modified over the years?
Everything, the building itself is the original building.
Okay.
Now, the Greyhound bus station used to be across the track, but now that's been
Merged
relocated.
here as well.
Yeah.
Okay. You were going to say something.
I was going to say there was a story added to this building. Originally it was only, I think, 2 stories, and they added the 3rd story to it.
Okay.
That was early on in the, not in recent history, but quite a ways back. Mr. Scott, do you know when that happened? I don't,
No, it was here in '77, so it may have been in
oh,
the
it was a
'60s.
lot
Yeah.
before that.
Maybe '50s or
Probably
'60s.
back in the 1800s, maybe.
Okay. And so obviously now there is a museum that's here as well. So can we make way into the museum, which I think is very, I think it's great that that's the case, because buildings, in my personal opinion, shouldn't necessarily be one-dimensional. Like, they have multiple uses. Obviously, we know this is one that's utilized from a passenger perspective and commerce. However, education is also tied into this building, which is, of course, very important. So can you all give us the scope on when you all decided to put these ideas and everything to play to where now we have a full-fledged museum?
I think we started about 2010. The inspiration came to me and some of the other original members there was a news article that, well, no, it wasn't a news article. My father had a collection of trains, and I had packed them up after the flood of '99 here, and I said, we need to put these somewhere, you know. He always enjoyed people coming to the house to look at his trains. And I said, you know, I know how much he enjoyed that, so I'd like to continue to do that. So that's when I started thinking about we needed a museum. And so I approached several people. I approached friends of mine who were tied into the railroad through their parents. And then we had the railroad enthusiasts like Tom and Gene. And, you know, so that's how we got started. And then we would just have meetings. Like I said, we would go to a restaurant and every month, wasn't it every month, Tom?
We were meeting monthly, I believe.
Yeah, every month we would eat at a restaurant, and then after the dinner we would just, you know, have business discussions about the Railroad Museum, and we did that. And then at Christmas, the mall allowed us to put a display in there, and so we had a big room, and we would set up the train table. We had running trains and everything, and just all kinds of historical information in there. So people would come by and they would, you know, look at our display in the mall. We did that for about maybe 4 years.
3 or 4 years at least.
Yeah. How, you know how it's kind of like when things aren't just given to you, you gain a greater appreciation for it, right? At least I try to tell my kids that. But being that this was a grassroots effort, right, and everyone kind of galvanized together and put their intellect and as well as physical properties that they may have had saved up, like you had mentioned your father, how much more special does that make a place like this for you all who've been involved since the very beginning?
Well, it meant a lot to me because, you know, like I said, all I was thinking about the whole while was just continuing what he just always had done. And that was, you know, just to share something that he loved with the community. So that was really what, you know, kept me going, you know, spurred me on. And then I met with such a wonderful group of people. You know, I didn't even know Tom and Gene before this, but they just came out of the blue, you know, and it was just wonderful, you know. I mean, Gene, he knew so much about trains, and he has a massive collection at his house. And then Tom, he knew about trains, and also he was a builder, and so, you know, we had the right people just mixed in there together. And then Ron Hines, our treasurer, you know, he was on top of the monies. Yeah. And so everybody just kind of, you know, meshed together well.
That's good.
And we became more a family than a club.
Yeah. Let me ask you all, as it relates to the history and the importance of trains in general across the country, economically, access, resources, and things like that. In this community, historically, how important was it for a train to be in this community? And do you all know the history of the first trains that were implemented here in the community?
I actually we wrote a book when I was in elementary school, The History of Railroads, in Weldon, North Carolina.
Okay.
And at that time, back in the 1800s when it was built, there was a track built from Weldon to Wilmington that had the longest straight stretch of railroad in the world. Wow. It came through Rocky Mount, but the line branched off from Wilson and went down to Wilmington. So it's a lot of history in this area. They used to have what was called Emerson Shops here, right, which was a large locomotive and car repair. They actually built railroad cars there. And Joyce's family was part of that. But historically, I think the railroad meant more to Rocky Mount than any other industry that was here. Yeah. And but
you feel like it superseded, because I know this is large cotton and tobacco plantations were in the area. So you're saying that it may have even superseded that.
Absolutely. And without the ability to transport those goods,
that's right.
You know, it never really would have really flourished. Right.
But it was so. Excuse me, let me interject. It was so big that they had their own hospital. They
really?
Had the Atlantic Coastline Hospital. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. And the YMCA, that's now the senior center right across the street, used to be where the crews were housed.
Okay.
So the crews coming in from Richmond, crews coming in from Hamlet and from South Carolina used to stay here while you got rest to go back, on your return trip the next day. So a lot of history here. When I first came to this area in the late 70s, 1 out of 5 people that you would meet, either they worked for the railroad or their family worked for the railroad.
Wow.
It was that big here. And of course the numbers have dwindled over the years,
Sure.
but the railroad still plays a prominent role in the history of this city,
Yeah.
in this area.
Is there anything that can kind of document the beginning work on the railroads here in this area? I know in some places, like in Appalachia, they would reach down to people in the Low Country. This was during enslavement, and enslaved labor would, clear the woods and things like that for the tracks, and then also lay down everything that's needed in order to get the trains to function properly. But what was that like here? Do you all know where the workers came from, or were they already homegrown folks? What were your
Mostly homegrown folks.
Okay.
And of course that predates us by 100 years.
hundreds a year? Yeah.
But I remember when, and this was back in the 80s, we were taking up a track that went from Roanoke Rapids to Norlina. It was a short subdivision. And when we got into Littleton and we had the crews there dismantling the tracks and taking it up, a man came out with a picture of when the track was first built and constructed.
Oh, wow.
And if you looked at the men and equipment, I mean, it was a stark contrast then to what it looked like then.
Yeah.
But the process was very similar. I mean, you had the same amount of people working, and you
Yeah.
had a handful of people just standing around watching.
Yeah.
But it was really, I think this line was built in segments just like I-95 was. So
And you said something very important about that. You said that the interstate was built to mirror
Yeah.
the train.
yeah. But before the interstates, it was just a highway network.
Okay.
So US 1 that goes from Raleigh to Petersburg, and Highway 301 that goes all the way from Florida all the way up to New York, were built to parallel the railroads so that you would have access to those goods so that you could truck it or send it out by rail.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. So obviously there's a lot of things that are here in this museum. So we have a new addition that's here.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Emma Sessoms.
Okay. Frederick Murphy. Nice to meet you.
sir.
Yeah. Yeah.
Emma is another one of our original members.
Okay, good. So part of the grassroots efforts, getting it done, right? So if y'all can walk me through and just kind of tell me the thought process of adding some of these pieces, where they may have come from, that would be great.
Okay, well, the pictures that we have up here, a lot of them were given to us by, like you said, families who had someone in the railroad, who worked for the railroad. And this person here, he had something to do with the railroad. It's been a while since I read the article, but a relative of his gave us this article.
Okay.
So we put this up here. All of these pictures in the frames, except this one, but these pictures in the frames, these came from in my father's train house. He had, because he had a wall of pictures and everything. So these came from that. And the wife of this man here gave us this picture. This is my grandfather there.
Okay.
My father's father.
Right here. Thomas
Edwards
Edwards.
Sr.
Okay, nice.
And this was just an article that was in the paper about us. Anytime we had the opportunity to be in the paper to show the
Oh, yeah,
museum,
most definitely.
we did. And while I'm here, I'll tell you that this train here, it operates. We plug it in, and the kids can come and push the button, and it can go. If you'd like for me to do that.
Yeah. Let's get a demonstration if you don't mind.
All right, no problem. Okay, so you hold it until the caboose gets here.
There we go.
Now this is called an O gauge. Okay, this is the larger one.
Okay.
Okay, and it goes around and down to the lake and comes back.
Okay.
All right.
So this track, was it modeled after here in Rocky Mount, somewhere here?
No, everything is just, I guess you'd say fictional,
Okay. All right. Let's catch it on the way back.
Okay.
There we go. So for all the train enthusiasts, you would love this place for sure. And there it comes to a stop.
It stops automatically.
Okay.
This is a bucket that was given to us. This is the fire buckets that they used.
Wow.
And I was told that they made them like that because, correct me, Sam, if I'm wrong, or either Tom. Didn't they make these buckets like this so that they wouldn't walk? Because, you know, they were flat bottom. They could walk away, and also they could be sat on.
They were no use to use on the farm or somewhere like that, so nobody would steal them.
Yeah.
Right.
That's one of the reasons.
Right. So these are the fire buckets that they have.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
And you would see them like a warehouse or a building, you would see them hanging up around occasionally, and water barrels also.
Okay. Now, she had mentioned that you are a builder, like a train
Well,
model train
doing
builder,
things
or-
like constructing
Okay.
the framework to put this on and different things of that
Okay.
nature.
Yeah, because
Good.
he helped build, or did you build by yourself? I know you helped build. We had a big, 16-foot table?
Yeah, it was
For,
about like that.
yeah, for a set of O-gauge trains. And that was what we used at the mall, and Tom played a really vital role. in
Gene did also in that, Gene.
Now, when you say O gauge, like, can you break down the different types?
Right. If you look here, this is basically 027. It means if you took the curved track here, put it together in a circle, it would be 27 inches in diameter.
Okay.
Something that looks similar to this is called O gauge, which is a 36-inch circle. And then you have what we have here is an N gauge, which, as you see, is a much smaller.
Right.
And between this and that, there's HO gauge.
Okay.
So we have an HO in here.
We got an H on, we have a Z over here.
Man, I'm learning a lot.
That's your Z gauge,
This right here.
right?
Okay. So you all see right here, this is the Z gauge.
Yeah,
What are you all's thoughts about just the advancement of trains and how now you have these like supermodel trains in which are implemented in other countries that of course they're trying to implement, of course, here in the United States as well, to where you can fast track from North Carolina to New York in hours, way less time than it would take 10 hours or what have you. Like, what are you all's thoughts about the evolution of trains?
It would be a very good thing. It's very expensive. That's the holdback here in the U.S. Over in California, they're building a high-speed line over there. And it's likely to get axed with the Trump administration.
Yeah.
If you look at the European countries and how they have really integrated rail into their way of life, everybody doesn't feel the need to have a car.
Yes.
You know, you got every family member has a car. We are just so wrapped up with having our own personal space that public transportation is always something that people sort of shy away from. But if you look at the rail network in Europe and compare it to the rail network here, it looks like we're just in our infancy. It will happen in time, but to Tom's point, it's very expensive to do. And you have to have, constant stops along the way just so that people can get where they need to go. Because areas like this and even smaller cities, once you get dropped off, how do you get around
That's
from
right.
that point on? They don't have public transportation. So in the larger cities, in the Northeast, they do have some high-speed trains that are running around 100 miles an hour. But the 240, 270 mile an hour trains that you see in Japan, we're a long way from that.
Wow.
It used to historically cost about $1 million a mile to build
$1
track.
million a
$1
mile.
million a mile.
My
That number
God.
now is probably, with inflation,
Yeah.
about 1.5 billion per mile. And that's if you don't have to build bridges. And with high-speed rail, you want there to be a definite connection between not having road crossings, so everything's going to be an overpass or an underpass. And that's just for liability purposes because you don't want accidents to happen. But we're getting there. I think the Amtrak routes that they've established between Raleigh and Charlotte is a good example of what change we will start to see come.
Yeah.
It will eventually be expanded to Rocky Mount.
Okay. They have like this. Sorry to interrupt, but I saw a commercial where they have like you can go to these different breweries at each of the stop, and so they're kind of like utilizing
Yeah.
these other different things from a marketing standpoint to encourage individuals to leave from Charlotte up to Raleigh and say this is, an add-on along the way. You get to stop at these breweries. You got this amount of time. You got to get back on before. So it looks like they're strategically putting things in place along the railroad lines because it allows people more access to other things versus making it what some may deem as just a boring train ride.
Right.
I actually caught the train from Raleigh to Charlotte my first time to go see a football game.
Okay.
And I was surprised with the renovations they made. Well, actually, kind of a new building they built in Raleigh for the passenger station, and how they constructed it with other things to do, restaurants and
Yep.
things.
Yep.
And the amount of time it takes to get from Raleigh to Charlotte by rail is about the same as if you would drive, except you don't have to deal with the traffic.
That's right.
But it was less than 4 hours, and it takes right at 4 hours to drive from here to Charlotte.
Yeah.
So that was a good experience. I think that will expand.
Yeah.
The state of North Carolina has bought an abandoned line that we took up in the late 70s that extended from Raleigh to Petersburg as another route to get north. That was called the S line.
Okay.
This was called the A line. Interstate 85 was built to parallel that line, and
Oh, wow.
US 1 was built to parallel that line, just like 301 and 95 were built on this side.
Okay.
So you'll see that everywhere. The line going from Atlanta up to Chicago is the I-75 route, and again, the railroads were there first, and then the highways came after because people followed railroads.
Yeah, yeah.
That was how you got your goods and services.
Wow. And so when we talk about the different railroad lines, right, I know just some off the top of my head is Norfolk Southern, CSX,
They're the
Atlantic,
They're the two big
so,
ones east of the Mississippi.
Okay.
You've got what's called Class 1 railroads.
okay.
These are the big four.
So that's like Delta versus JetBlue.
Just
and-
like that.
Okay.
Just like that. So you
No knock against JetBlue, but I'm just saying like that's how people perceive it, right?
So you've got CSX and Norfolk Southern east of the Mississippi. You've got Burlington Northern and Union Pacific west of the Mississippi. And there are some points that they all, like major cities, New Orleans, Chicago, Memphis, Nashville, all of them are there, but they really are not encroaching on each other's business.
Right.
And then in Canada, you've got the Canadian Pacific and the Canadian National. They both have drifted down and migrated down into the States, but a very small margin of their revenue is generated in the U.S.
Okay. Okay, good stuff. This is good information to know. So if we can go around to the other side and see what other things that you all have here. As you see right now, it looks like open on Saturdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Do we look for that to be the remaining hours? Because everything is everything like volunteer?
Everything
hours?
is volunteer, yes. So, hopefully as our membership increases,
Yeah.
we'll be able to extend it, to some other days during the week. But we do also offer people the opportunity, as yourself, to call and ask for appointments. And
Okay.
we can come in for that.
Excellent. Nice. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So this is Bob.
This is Bob.
Railroader, and how he got named. We had a naming contest for the kids one day.
Okay.
And so they put all the names in the box, and one was drawn out, and it was Bob.
Okay.
We thought we'd get something a little more original, but it was Bob. So Bob.
Maybe they're used to, because they got Bob the Builder, so they were like, we're going to do Bob the
I
Railroader,
guess so. I guess so.
Now, I have one of these, but it's on a larger scale, and it was my great-grandmother's. And so this looks very familiar to me. Talk about some of these items and how they will be utilized.
Sam and Tom.
Sam and Tom, she's passing the buck.
These are examples of lanterns. It's how you used to signal. The train crew would signal the engineer.
Okay.
So there's different movements that you see. If you pull into an airport and you see the guys out
Yeah,
directing
doing
there, well, they use lanterns as a form of communication before they had radios. So there were different signals that you could convey 3 or 4 people in a line to tell the engineer what to do, when to stop, how fast to go, things of that nature. So
Okay. Yeah. And obviously you got to have your Got to have your hard hat on there. Nat Love. Why is Nat Love incorporated in this display?
One of our members, Ron, he does a lot of research, and I think he was like a. He told me the other day because he just put this in here, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry I'm not familiar with it.
No, that's
But
okay.
I'm trying to think if he said he was. Well, it
Maybe
says
he-
here
he was a Pullman porter.
Pullman porter author, and
Yeah.
he was a cowboy,
Yeah.
a rodeo performer, and so he put all that information in there about him.
Okay.
And then
Deadwood Dick.
Deadwood Dick is in here, and you have the information on him.
Yeah.
And so this is new information. I apologize, but
No,
I haven't
no,
had
it's
a
okay.
chance to read it myself.
And so this is the evolution, obviously, of what, because I'm sure that these would mirror what real trains were during the time period, right? Like these models.
They
For the
look more
train.
like European, don't they?
Yeah.
Sam?
Okay, so this wouldn't be United States.
Right.
And I
style.
think they're tin too. I don't think they're.
They were just replicas that were built just for kids to enjoy.
Okay.
These are what the actual cars themselves
Look like.
really look like today. And you've got a box car here that you would ship commodities like beer and wine and clothing. This is a gondola that you would put logs or cross ties in. That's an Amtrak locomotive. That's an example of a tank car that you would ship petroleum, oil, or different chemicals in. And
Coal?
this is what the old coal cars used to look like when you had steam engines.
What about cotton and tobacco? Which one would
That would have
typically
moved
been
in a
on?
boxcar like
box
this.
car,
Yeah,
okay.
something that's enclosed.
And I say that because this region, obviously, that's.
Yeah.
And what about lumber rather?
Lumber would have moved on what's called a flat car. It looks similar to this, but
Just without
it's
the sides?
just doesn't have the raised sides on it. So you can slide a forklift in and lift the lumber off the car.
Okay. Nice. Is everyone here a descendant of someone who worked in the railroad industry?
I didn't.
Okay, you didn't.
I actually worked in the industry.
Yeah, you worked in the industry. I'm gonna ask you about that, but you didn't. Okay, okay. So where did your interest for trains come in at?
My fiance.
Okay.
He was also one of their founding members too.
Okay. Now, was that a prerequisite that in order for him to? Okay.
No,
Okay. And we do have an administrative person that's here. No?
Actually, I'm one of the board members.
Oh, another board member. Okay. Nice to meet you. What's your name?
Joy Henson.
Okay, Joy. So, what about you and your connection to the train industry, or is this just
No,
something that you love to do?
My mother is Joy
Oh,
Stansler,
okay,
and
we'll see.
my grandfather was Thomas Edwards.
So you didn't have a choice.
Well, I grew up, my grandfather, when he was working on the trains, he would bring us down here to the train station.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And we would watch the trains come through and, just grew up watching him with his trains in
Yeah.
the backyard. And it just became, it was just in the blood.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we passed it down even to our children. And my grandchildren, they just love the trains.
I love
So
it.
we bring them to the train station to let them see the museum,
Mm-hmm.
and the trains go by, and it's just in the blood.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. All right, so we'll go over on this side before we swing over there. So we have some Pullman porters. Scott, if you don't mind discussing the history of the Pullman porters.
Well, it's two different industries in one in the railroad. You've got the passenger element of it, and you've got the freight element. So on the passenger trains, you would have obviously an engineer, you'd have a conductor, and then you'd have the Pullman porters, which were helpers and service workers
Okay.
on the trains. On the freight side of it, you'd have an engineer, you'd have a conductor, and you'd have a brakeman and a flagman. And you'd also have what was called an engineer trainee, which was called a fireman. So back when you had steam locomotives, the fireman was actually the guy that controlled the fire and made sure there was enough coal in the boiler to keep the train running. As we migrated to diesel electric, and that was no longer necessary, the fireman position became the training mechanism to become an engineer. So fast forward from then you had a 5-man crew back in the 70s. Now you have a 2-man crew. You have an engineer and a conductor. And with automation and autonomous training, eventually you just have one person on the train.
Yeah.
And
So for the industry, like in places like Rocky Mount, with jobs, that
Yes.
obviously
it's a
took a
critical
hit.
impact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Critical impact of that.
Yeah. I can't help but so when I see some of these, right, and the different types of advertisements for the trains and, Pullmans and the people that are going to be providing services, when we think about the time during segregation, and when we talk about obviously the bus boycotts and things like that, and where people of African descent had to sit, people of color had to sit, was that the same makeup on the train lines as well?
It was. It was. And it was up until the 60s, I think mid 60s, that everybody was granted full access to ride and sit anywhere. But the passenger industry has changed so much from what it used to be. It used to be very grandiose.
Yeah.
I mean, fine china and,
Like
and
this.
really elegant meals.
Really?
Yeah, it's nothing like what it has become today. With
Now I haven't ridden the train, so what is it?
now it's pretty much
Paper? Is it-
microwave food and paper plates and
That's no good.
Yeah, it's very bus like.
Yeah. The hospital food now?
But they do have some trains that operate as sort of excursion trains.
Okay.
A couple of really nice ones up in Canada that are transcontinental,
Oh, nice.
that have elegant dining. They've got observation cars. A few of those here in the U.S., but not very many. But the industry has changed a lot.
Yeah. Makes sense. And I'm looking right here. This is the retirement of Thomas Edward Sr. here in Rocky Mount, and this would be your ancestor.
That's my father.
This your father right here. This your father's father. Okay. Got you. Wow.
He was a fireman, and my father was a fireman on the steam engines.
So I'm sure everyone has this picture in your family.
No,
No?
not really.
Look, daughter's over there. She's shaking her head like, no. We got to get some copies made, y'all.
And this is one of the articles that was done about my dad, and that like I said, that was the inspiration.
Yeah.
You know.
Nice. All righty.
So
The thing I found in every tool.
So now we're
those
heading
are
over
some other
to
pictures. We had this award donated to us, and it's in that display case there. And
the
this is-
E. Harriman Safety Award. Okay.
So that's in it. That's my grandfather again.
Oh, wow.
And there's a painting over there on the wall from that.
He was pretty highly decorated around these parts, it looks like.
38 years.
Nice.
The only job I had.
You're making it worse. Okay. Okay. This is the award down there that I was
Okay.
talking about.
So this is the original award right here. Okay. Okay. And we have another room that's over here that has a lot more in-depth.
Yeah. By the way, these murals
things.
were painted by the Nash Central High School Art Club. So we have 3 of them. We have this one
Okay.
and 2 in there.
Okay.
And this is this was called the well, my dad used to call it the sign-up shop, where he would go and I guess check on when he was going to be going out. Sam can tell you exactly what they call it, but I know Dad always called it a sign-up shop.
Okay.
Okay. This was one of his. I think this was his father's shovel.
So this was your grandfather's shovel.
My grandfather's shovel.
And it says R, what does it say?
that was
RFP? RF?
yeah. That
Something
was
like RF plus P, it looks like.
yeah. It was not. It wasn't the ACL.
Yeah, see.
I'm trying to remember what. Let me ask Sam.
There you go.
Sam, what was the RFP? Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac.
Okay.
Yeah.
This
yeah.
line was operated by Seaboard Coastline until
Right.
you got to Richmond.
Right.
There was a little segment of track between Richmond and D.C. that was owned by the state of Virginia.
Right.
Okay.
It's been since bought out by CSX, but that was what that RFP
Yeah. So
is.
that's what that is. Richmond, Fredericksburg.
And being here, it really makes me think about just how important the railroads were, right? So even thinking about, because we're not too far from the Atlantic Ocean, right? Like, what, an hour and a half or something?
2 hours.
2 hours, right? But even thinking about times back then, when you talk about seafood being transported and things like that, all of that would have had to have been via the railroad, right?
Yeah, the perishable items like that really wasn't conducive to rail. at
Okay.
one point. So they developed a boxcar that was refrigerated, and they call them reefer cars.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's what
How did
they-
we go from? Okay, go ahead.
That's what they would use to ship perishable items.
Okay, okay.
But there's always a risk of failure there that
This is true.
technology in the boxcar could fail. But rail traditionally, you think about rail transportation and benefits, it's beyond 300 miles. Anything less than 300 miles, traditionally, it's a better truck market than a better rail market. So a lot of that stuff has moved into truck now that used to move by rail, but unless you're going from Florida up to New England or vice versa.
Okay.
So every freight car had what's called a waybill. If you imagine if you're a passenger on Amtrak, you have a ticket. So the waybill is a ticket for each car that was transported in the train. And the conductor would do his paperwork back here. So you had a little stove, you had a little cook stove, and had a little cot you could sleep in. This is called a cupola. It's where the flagman used to climb up and just view the side of the train. So every time you go around a curve, if you're sitting up here, you could see the side of the train. You could see if anything was burning, anything was on fire, anything was dragging. So that was a cupola. You had to climb up into that. But here's the handbrake to stop it. That's the knuckle that connects it. And but again, that was the conductor's workstation.
I'm always curious about, we hear about pirates at sea, right? What about train pirates?
They had some just happen just recently.
Really?
Out on the West Coast. They obviously had some background information to know what was in those cars, and they targeted Corona beer.
Okay.
And there's another group that targeted Nike equipment.
Okay.
And so these were moving in containers like this.
Right.
And these guys found a way to break into those containers, but they targeted those trains knowing what was in those cars.
Was it normally, were those type of things normalized in newspapers historically as it relates to identifying when different routes were negatively affected or to be on the lookout for train pirates?
No, but back in the 1800s it was pretty common. Jesse
Yeah.
James robbing trains
Yep.
because the trains were used to ship money and gold as well as other precious gems. And but for them it was hit or miss. But these guys today have some inside information that told them specifically because train schedules aren't published.
Yes.
That's not public knowledge like an Amtrak schedule would be.
Yeah, yeah.
So someone had to have some intel to know when and where and how.
What about from a safety standpoint? Because obviously it can be dangerous working
Yeah.
in the railroad industry. What were the most common unfortunate deaths in the railroad industry?
Derailments, accidents, violating safety rules, and the workers themselves being killed by being run over but there's not a whole lot of sabotage that has taken place. There is some where people and this is an example of a switch where you change the diversion route.
Right here.
Yeah. So people have vandalized switches like that and caused derailments. They've
Intentionally.
vandalized rail cars, intentionally. I will admit, and I hate this is on record, but as a kid, we used to climb up on the trains and ride from Wells to Roanoke Rapids, which was like 4 or 5 miles. And we go around doing a lot of destructive things that we didn't realize were
They were
destructive.
destructive, yeah.
We were just playing. If you
Yeah.
see a wheel, you spin it.
Yep.
And
Oh no.
Yeah,
I
but-
think I know where this is going. or where it had the potential to go.
I had no idea that 15 years later, 20 years later, I'd actually be working for the railroad and working on the train. And then I began to understand how dangerous some of the things that we were doing actually were.
Yeah.
But we were just kids having fun and playing. And but it's not nearly as much vandalism that occurs as you think there would be. But the railroads and rail cars and rail equipment is just something that people just don't understand a lot about.
Yeah.
So most of the injuries and incidents that you have and fatalities actually involve rail grade crossings where people are hit by trains.
Okay.
And we've had a fair amount of that here with all these crossings that go across the track and no grade separation. So that is something that the state and federal governments have sought to do more of, especially in large urban areas, to create that separation with overpasses or underpasses so that you don't have so much risk of having crossing grade accidents.
Yeah. You know, I love to hear just how passionate everyone in this room is about trains, because you have everyone that's in their niche career, right? We know that we have people that are very proud to be former military or serving in the military or in the medical field, sports and things like that. I can honestly say I don't think that I hear a lot of people being very proud of working in this field, but I also haven't necessarily met a whole lot of people in this field, because I've always thought, just based on my generation, I was born in 1979, that there's just one person that's on the train, and that's the person that's driving it, and everyone else is everywhere else, right? Just waiting for it to stop. But that clearly, historically, was just not the case, and it was really a unit of people that had to really, really practice safety in order to make sure that not only products get delivered where they need to be delivered, but also the human beings that they were also carrying as well. So, how does it feel being part of an industry that was really part of a human service field as well, as it relates to the safety of people? Because it's not just the people that's riding the trains, it's the people that may be driving, right? Alongside the train as well, that you're responsible for.
Yeah, it's most people have a lot of pride in what we did and how we did it, but most of us had no idea that it would be something we would be doing as a career. To be honest, I really only intended for it to be a summer job. I was going back to school, and I had so much fun and made such good money that I thought I'd do it another year. But there is no training for this. There is no school you go to prepare you for this. It really was all on the job training.
Okay.
And they knew that everybody that started knew absolutely nothing about what you were going to be doing. So now we send guys to a 6-week school that we've got one set up in Atlanta, and they go through all of the formalities, all the rules, all the instruction. They pretty much told us you ride 7 trains for 1 week and then you're good to go. And
You're an expert.
There was a lot of on-the-job training that took place, but it is an industry that I think everybody that has participated in it or their families just has a lot of pride that you helped build this country. And you help run this country, and without the railroads, our country just wouldn't exist.
This is true.
So, but you know, for me, it was 38 years, and like I said, it started out just being a summer job, and it turned out to be the only job I ever had.
Wow.
As an adult.
Wow.
But you know, Joyce and everybody else here has family that has worked in this industry, and just very prideful, hardworking people. And this work was not that hard, but it took a lot of your time.
Yeah.
Took a lot of time away from your families, and but we all lived pretty good lives as a result of it, didn't we?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even looking here, so we're talking about building supplies, right? We're talking about Dole, right? We see this Dole truck right here. So we're talking pineapples and the fruit industry. Every sense of industrialization products at some point of time, it seems as if they, of course, had to use a train, right? And so that's just how important trains were and still are. Do you all have any fears of trains not necessarily being a staple in regards to transportation anymore of goods at some point?
No, I think it will always exist because you can't move the quantities by truck that you can by rail.
Right.
So, for example, if you're moving coal from a coal plant to from a mine to a coal plant, and you can move 12 and 13,000 tons at once, you know, as opposed to a truck that can carry about 40 tons.
Yeah.
You can imagine how many more trucks you would need to put on the road to supplement that.
This is true.
So everything from automobiles, the makeup of the freight will change, and the makeup of how it's transported by rail will change. But the fact that you have to have the railroads to support growth is something that will continue.
Yeah.
It'll just look different.
They just look different. That's the way of the world, and that's a lot of industries at this point. When you sit back and you think about it, nothing has just stayed stagnant. It's always fluid. There's some elements of it from the past that, of course, moves forward and is able to withstand the test of time. But evolution is part of what it all looks like, right? So this has been an amazing visit. Again, this is my second train museum that I've visited. Yeah, the Holbrook Hotel, and it's a train museum in Dixon County, Tennessee, which is where my folks are out of. This is they have somewhat similar of a setup that's here. So I just kind of want some last statements about you all, how prideful you all are with the work that you all have done to preserve the history of the train industry here, as well as where you all would like to see the education and the understanding of this history. What does that look like moving forward? So anyone that would like to say anything, you can. Yeah, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't do it earlier. One of our members just brought this in last week. He worked in the electric shop, and this was the group that worked in there with him.
Nice.
So he just brought this picture in, and we're going to hang this out here.
Okay. And it has all the names.
It
too,
has
so
all the names. He
that's
put
what's
all
up.
the names and everything. So
Okay.
I tried to get him to get out here, but he was involved in some other things he wasn't able to. But he has a lot of history too.
Good.
After
Good.
having worked in the shop.
What are you all's thoughts as it relates to the future of the museum and how important these type of displays and exhibits are?
Well, I believe we'll be around. I really think that, because when we do have visitors to come in, a lot of them have relatives, again, who worked for the railroad, or they remember things about trains when they were children, and they seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people long for the days when life was a little easier, and with trains and things like that. So I think that we'll be around. I think we help stir up a lot of memories for people.
That's good. Yeah.
And I would say, I think as far as the Railroad Museum, it gives a lot of information that people don't know about railroads. As far as with trains, like most people, when you come to a railroad's tracks, they want to look straight down, but you're not supposed to look straight down. You look 6 feet up because the train lights are about 6 to 9 feet up in the air.
Yeah.
And that's how people get hit a lot of times. They look straight down the tracks, and all they're looking into is the darkness of the of the train.
But
they
you
don't
need to
see the
look up.
light because it's above them.
Okay.
So.
Great information. Anybody else? Any parting words?
No, I'm like Joyce. I think it'll be around for a while, because you do find a lot of interesting information that a lot of people don't know, and like you said, will long for things to come back, but they'll never be like they were.
Yeah.
But they were what you could term the good old days.
Yeah.
But it is a lot of enlightening information that has been gathered here over really a short time. But Joyce has worked diligently to get this off the ground, and I'm extremely proud of her hard work and dedication, to get it.
With my
at this
team.
year.
With my
Yeah,
team.
but you had the idea, and she's persistent now. She is persistent. She is. So.
That's good. Tom?
I'd say it's a great place for kids to come and maybe see what the grandparents did here.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of history here, sure is.
Most definitely. Sam?
And I'm the newest member. I just moved back here from Florida in 2015, and I met Joyce and her team about 2019 when we were trying to get the CCCX terminal up and running. So I've been very appreciative of being able to just play a small role in this and helping these guys out with whatever they need. But if we don't preserve this history, then we'll forget where we came from.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's important to me.
Most definitely. Most definitely. So listen, that is another episode with me, Frederick Murphy, here at History Before Us. What I will do is I will leave your contact information and the website in the description so anybody that watches this can see. And if you are a person that likes this type of content, please remember to subscribe and share. Peace and blessings.